It's been part of my practice for probably the last 4 years, since I lived down the south coast of New South Wales, and I got to know a little bit more about Aboriginal culture and country and the story of this. And I lived all over the world and knew histories and politics from all over the world, but knew nothing really about the history of Australia and Aboriginal culture. So it is my practice to acknowledge country. And I'm really grateful actually that ATSIM, Adventist Church's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Ministry, has put together a really great resource for that. So I'm actually going to use theirs today to acknowledge country. Today, we acknowledge our God and Saviour, Jesus Christ. We acknowledge you, Lord, because you are our creator and provider and supreme owner of all things. We also respectfully acknowledge the Wurundjeri people. Wurundjeri, my cousin over here is helping me out, Wurundjeri people, who are the traditional custodians of this land. We pay tribute to the elders past and present and acknowledge they have cared for this country over countless generations. We recognise the continuing contribution that the people make to the life of this region and pray that we can work together to leave a legacy of reconciliation, justice and hope for all future Australians. And today we're talking about reframing, and I'm talking about stories and all the stories that interact and how they are retold and told in different ways. And so it seemed really important and appropriate to acknowledge the stories that run through our nation, quietly, silently often. Today, I am going to be talking about our stories, some of my stories, stories that I've heard. We're going to be hanging out in Acts 9, those who want to get yourselves ready. We're going to look at what are the stories that are inside these stories and how they perhaps connect to our stories, or how my story might connect to your story. Now, I'm going to hopefully hope that you feel encouraged and cared for, perhaps a few good laughs. I plan to be embarrassed with a couple of my stories, but some are also painful and others are redemptive. I'm going to be drawing from an ancient story, from modern history, and from one of my favourite current elders. I have a sense of circle of elders that I draw from. Some are musical, some are poets, some are writers, some you've never heard of, some are really famous. So we'll see how we go. And we're going to wrap it all up with a musical reflection at the end from one of my current musical influences that really encourages me on my spiritual journey. So I hope we can do all of this in about 3 hours or less. Moy approves, which is the problem for your church, can I just say. But you're fortunate because I like to keep things concise. All right. Up. Aha. Read with me. As Peter travelled about the country, he went to visit the Lord's people who lived in Lydia, where he found a man named Ananias who was paralysed. We had a story about paralysis earlier, and had been bedridden for 8 years. Ananias, Peter said to him, Jesus Christ heals you. Get up, roll up your mat. And immediately Ananias got up. All of those who lived in Lydia and Sharon saw him and turned to the Lord. Now, in another story, in Joppa, there was a disciple named Tabitha. In Greek, her name is Dorcas, and she was always doing good and helping the poor. And about that time, I love that phrase, she was doing good and helping the poor, and about that time, she became sick and died. And her body was washed and placed in the upstairs room. Now, Lydia was near Joppa, so when the disciples heard that Peter was in Lydia, they sent 2 men to him and urged, please come at once. Peter went with them. And when he arrived, he was taken upstairs to the room. All the widows stood around, crying and showing him the robes and clothing that she had made while she was still with them. Peter sent them all out of the room. Then he got down on his knees and prayed. Turning towards the dead woman, he said, Tabitha, get up. She opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He took her by the hand and helped her to her feet. Then he called for the believers, especially the widows, and presented her to them alive. This became known all over Joppa, and many people believed in the Lord. And Peter stayed in Joppa for a while with a tanner named Simon. So, a couple of rather huge miracles, wouldn't you say? I don't know about you, I'm never a big fan of the miracle stories. I find them a bit tough to swallow because I don't know a single person who has been raised from the dead or healed like this. And I don't actually know anybody who knows anybody. So if you know somebody who knows somebody, come have a chat afterwards and then you've got something different to say. But I don't know anybody who knows this kind of a miracle happening. And I'm like, how does that actually connect to our reality? What does that mean to me today? How does that have any relevance to my existence? Because this never happens in my life. But it's interesting because when I wrestled with this thought, I wondered about how Jesus actually speaks. And when he speaks often was in parables. And what is it about a parable? What does it look like? Leonard Sweet, one of my favourite elders, describes it like this. This meant he spoke only the mashal. He gave only the story or the factual account, not the nimshal or the explanation. And the nimshal or the explanation was reserved only for his inner circle of disciples. Meaning is not explained but revealed to those of faith and those in relationship. And I wonder if perhaps sometimes with his miracles, this was also happening. Perhaps it was the factual account. This is what happened. You know, the paralysed man was healed and he walked, and the good woman who was done great works had died and was resurrected. But actually, what is the story? What's the nimshal inside the story? The one that perhaps connects to our story and has some relevance. So for the embarrassing story, actually I get to embarrass my brother as well, which is perfect on this story. So I've just come back from Thailand. I lived in Thailand for the first 13 years of my life, and we visited Chiang Mai, which I hadn't been to for a long time, and we went and found this friend of mine who I hadn't seen for 20 years since this trip in 1997. So they were other missionaries who worked up in northern Thailand, and they went to spend summer every year in Sweden for 2 months because her mother was Swedish. So this one summer, my first summer of being studying at college, at Walla Walla College in Washington State, my family sort of gathers together. We kind of get together in the middle. So we met in Russia and Sweden, as you do, because my parents were in Thailand and I was in America, so we all came together. So this was a beautiful, look, Northern Europe in summer is amazing. It's like lush and green and long days and it's all, beautiful. So we went from her house to this lake. And so we all got bicycles and rode out. That's my brother. He would be thoroughly embarrassed by that photo, which is perfect. Some of you know him here, which is helpful. Anyway, we rode out to the lake and I was given that rubbish rickety bike. It was horrible. It was like this thing that did this. My brother got the awesome bike because Linnea, who we just visited in Chiang Mai, had a bit of a crush on him. So he got the good bike. We got to the edge of the lake and as we're coming up, there was this row of boulders, like little boulders, like this big, and then a gap and then a boulder and then a gap and a boulder, which is quite normal to keep the cars out, let the bikes through. I was paralysed with decision. Left or right of the boulder? Left or right, left or right? I couldn't decide to go left or right of that boulder. I went straight over it. Down an embankment into a massive blackberry bush and everything was up and I was laughing hysterically because I knew it was ridiculous and it was going to be a great story. That moment of indecision thrust me over. That bike was never the same. My dear brother actually rode it back for me and gave me the good one, but that bike was never the same. That moment of paralysis, that indecision, ended me up in a blackberry bush. What I could have done instead was just made a decision and ended up at the lake and gone for a swim or gone for a fish or laid in the sun. Our stories are beautiful things. And this is only a very mild story of paralysis, and it's funny, but it's actually significant in a way too, because sometimes there are things that stop us from making worthwhile decisions. Ananias had been paralysed on a mat for 8 years. I wonder, what's your story? What's my story of paralysis? What are the decisions or change or risk or extraction from damaging situations, behaviours that you feel frozen in or that I feel frozen in? What is beyond the boulders if we could just make that decision? Perhaps it could be falling in a heap or ending up in a blackberry bush, but maybe there is just a lake to swim in, some fish or a chance to bask in the sun. Perhaps there is a sense of stuckness, of being caught in a particular part of a story or a trauma, which is always valid when we go through trauma. I come from a background of being hospital chaplain. I'm currently on leave from that, but I hang out with trauma quite a lot. But the question is, do you want to stay in that trauma? Do I want to stay there, stuck in that part of the story? And perhaps we've been through a period of paralysis and you've emerged. Amazing, because it happens, by the way. It really does. So can we have the courage then, for those of us who emerge and re-emerge and re-emerge and emerge and re-emerge, to share our stories, to be vulnerable, to be open and honest about what it's like to be stuck and what it took to get out of that paralysis? Sharing our story is a moment of vulnerability, but it may encourage somebody else to open up about where they're at right now, realising that, guess what? Your life isn't as awesome as it looks on Facebook. I wish it was. In some ways, the paralytic Ananias was lucky because the source of his paralysis was really obvious, like he was stuck on a mat. However, for most of us, those things are hidden. Yeah. Those parts of our story, maybe no one knows, or at least we think no one knows, or we think we're hiding really well, but often it's hidden. But this is the hope. This is the glory story, as one of my friends in hospital said. God knows. And he wants to be a redemptive part of that story. He wants to be the reframing of that story, and he wants to offer healing and a chance to get through. Maybe it's another person who you can reach out to who can help. Perhaps all you can do is pray and cry in private and just know that at some point something's going to change. But if you can reach out and trust someone, guess what? Almost everybody in this room, most of us, are either in a moment of paralysis, emerging from a paralysis of some sort, or about to get back into one. That is the cycle of life. Boy, isn't that awesome and encouraging for today? Woo, she's such a positive preacher. But we're all shifting through different stages at all times. One of the most difficult things, though, is that we live in a society, and I think as Christians perhaps even harder, that we're meant to be awesome. We have to present awesome, and if you're not awesome, then clearly your faith isn't good enough and you must be dirty or have done something really wrong. So to actually own that would suggest that there's something that you have done that's bad. Maybe you have, but that's okay as well. But guess what? We aren't unworthy. In the story of Ananias, Peter was sent in to heal just with words. Just hold that. All he had to do was use words. How easy is it for words to break and words to build? And how stories can be reframed that quickly with the shifting of a few words. Jesus Christ heals you. Get up, roll up your mat. A man's life was not only transformed, but it also became a witness because his story was shared. And all of those who lived in Lydia and Sharon saw him and turned to the Lord. Now, this is a literal story, right? This is like, is it literal? Anyway, it's a literal story. A healed man got up and off he went. But I wonder, what is more deeply happening in this space? People are moved and connected and themselves perhaps desire healing and wholeness. It's not just about the physical. I mean, I get emotional at a clip on Facebook. Facebook's sending a bit of a pitch today, aren't they? I'm slightly addicted. Anyway, get a bit of a clip on Facebook. Someone's at their wedding giving out food to homeless, or, the dog is cute. I mean, I can cry so easily. I'm a crier. It's not a problem. Okay. Criers, we band together. Do you know that crying tears reduces heart attacks? Just want you to all know that. Yeah. If you don't cry, you'll probably be on the cardiac ward later. Okay. Anyway, just saying. It's true. Okay. How much more of life can we get and be abundantly creative when we delve into the unexpected stories of our own and of others and realise the depth they offer us? Now, Tabitha, I love Tabitha. She was awesome. Dorcas, Tabitha, was portrayed as the embodiment of the perfect serving Christian. She saw needs. She responded with clothing and caring for the poor. And all of a sudden, she seizes up, gets sick and dies. She seizes sick, die. It's quite intense. The Nimshal, the story within the story of her story, connected very strongly to my story when I went to the UK to serve as a ministry leader. Now, I've had a very, very clear call into ministry since I was 17 years old. Yep, I'm going to do this. But my very sensible parents said, don't do a theology degree first because you'll never get a job. Fair enough, did another degree first. Then I went and did my theology degree and didn't get a job. And so in that year of after not getting a job, it was like a 9-month wait, which is interesting. Anyway, 9 months. Anyway, then I ended up going to England. I got this amazing opportunity to go to Cornwall, work in this really innovative outreach project and manage a team of volunteers and work with the church and do this whole thing. Oh, it's meant to be pictures, sorry. I'm not concentrating. I'm just talking. No. There we go. Pictures. Anyway, it ended up being the worst 2 years of my life. So I poured out and poured out and poured out. I worked for the team, the church, the youth. I had resistance on every front. I had my character attacked publicly, my intentions questioned. At the end of those 2 years, I was totally broken. I literally broken, disillusioned, and my dream of ministry was pretty much dead. That sense of self-trust was gone. I thought, how could God have possibly called me into this? Clearly I got it wrong, because what kind of God calls you into that level of suffering? My senior minister, as I left England, said to me, please take the fact that this was a horrendous experience and it was true what happened to you, and don't imagine for a minute that you just streamed it all up. And if I had been my first 2 years in ministry, I would never have returned to ministry. I thought, that's helpful, is it? It kind of was helpful in a way because I always knew that it was true, but then I kind of ended up back in Australia and I'm like, I'm dead. I'm literally emotionally dead. I'm spiritually dead. I don't know what I'm going to do. So I just kind of plodded along. What are the places that we are all have been? Perhaps too much, and we are left alone and wondering how being this broken is possible. Can it really be true? Now, it's true the burnout rate among missions or people in ministry is particularly high, but for all of us, there are deaths. Whether it be marriages, whether it be dreams, financial security, children, whether they actually die or whether their behaviour makes you want to die, family function, carefully laid out plans, all of these things, innocence, jobs, identity, they're all deaths, and we all have them. So then what happens? With Tabitha, it struck me how she was doing all these good things, right? And then she got sick and died. And it made me wonder about my own death of a dream, of a ministry, of an expectation of what I was going to be and what I was going to be doing. This is what emerged. I worked so hard in Cornwall and other situations. There's been a few other deaths, by the way. This isn't the only one. We all go through it. But sometimes it takes more than one death to really realise that I was working mostly out of my own strength, out of my own skills and out of my own creativity, which are all God-given. And I'm actually quite creative and I've got quite good skills. But they weren't spirit-fuelled, always. And sometimes when you have greater skills, it's harder to need to rely on the one who gives you the skills in the first place. So death was necessary. One of the most powerful parts of the story is that for Christians, and for me and for you, our death is not final. A physical, emotional, spiritual. And for me, today, knowing that my story is a testament to that, I stand before you, in ministry on leave, but in ministry, getting to engage in my passion as storyteller up here at the front. And almost 2 years ago, affirmation publicly becoming commissioned as a minister of this church. That is ridiculous. That should never have happened, can I just say. It's a God moment. Our lives are the present, living, breathing gospel of Jesus. It's not about the future. It's not about our past. It's about the present. And that story of resurrection, whether it's mine or yours, it's not for the end of the world or the end of our lives. It's for every day when our worlds end in our life. I could tell you that the story of the redemption from a woman who came back to Australia from the UK broken, never ever thinking she'd be in ministry again. Not a chance. Certainly not a pastor in this church. Not a chance. Team at home. Yeah. However, God had a purpose, and he has a purpose and meaning for each of us. And I know that every part of my story, every trauma, every bit of the suffering, what I learned has contributed to where I am and who I am. And I offer it to you to encourage you as to who you are and where you're at the moment. because that's what God encourages us to do. Coming to terms with our story and its purpose in the world and allowing God to reframe it, to capture our story and to make it something different. Now Tabitha, lucky her, had a resurrection in private. Peter sent them out of the room. He got down on his knees and prayed. Turning towards a dead woman, he said, "Tabitha, get up." She opened her eyes and seeing Peter, she sat up. He took her by the hand and helped her to her feet. Sometimes our stories of healing and redemption are played out in private. Sometimes they're not. But when the timing is right, we take the risk. We not only rise strong, thanks Breno Brown, one of my favourite elders, write it down, she's awesome, but we open up our story and our shadowy moments and the grittiness of it all, and we offer it out with uncertainty, but with faith and hope, knowing we connect to each other and to God. We can tell stories and listen to stories for the factual account, for the mashal. Perhaps we can open ourselves and tell and hear the nimshal, the meaning that's woven into the stories as it's revealed because we're connected in relationship to that person and to God. Perhaps we can choose to be open to the intimate relationship God offers, because we're then gaining access to the deep things he desires for us in the deep relationships. Perhaps tentatively doing that, knowing that what he reveals and what we discover may not be very comfortable or nice. And sometimes the uncomfortable truth about ourselves may result in a painful process or journey of addressing something. Don't think that I stand up here having it all sorted, by the way. We're all in process. We're all in process. And we're all on a journey of healing and transformation if we choose. Maybe this isn't your story. Maybe you're all sweet. Liar. Anyway. But perhaps at the moment you're in a good space. And this moment might be the time for you to encourage someone else, to be open to someone else's need and to come alongside them. Perhaps sharing a story of your history will help them open up to share their story of their current paralysis or the current death. This takes us to identity. We draw our identity from where we choose it from. Is it from Jesus? Is it from other people? Is it from what culture says? Is it from our skills or our strengths, our jobs, our partners, how awesome our kids are? I have no kids, so I'm sweet. So we have a choice where we get our identity from. If we choose Jesus rather than these other voices, then it possibly happens that the deaths will be less often and the paralysis will be have less length of time. Things will move a bit quicker. The last story I want to share is a modern history story. Langdon Gilkey was a prisoner of war during World War II with the Japanese occupation of China. He spent 5 years in the internment camp where there was between 2,000 and 1,200 people up and down through the whole period that he was there. So it was a Japanese concentration camp in China. He wrote a really interesting sort of lived experience of being in an internment camp. I'm not going to go into all of it, but there was one thing that really struck me in the story, and he describes the reactions of two different groups of women who were assigned the task to clean toilets. The first were two Russian women, and they were from a low-class background but had been very upwardly mobile and married an American and a British banker and were doing very well, thank you very much. On the other hand, there was two British women of high birth and privilege. They'd been born to it, and they were, So I guess who wouldn't have a bar of cleaning the toilets? Who wouldn't clean the toilets? Anyone? The English? Actually, it was the Russians. And it wasn't because of the culture, it was because of this. Obviously, the case of their refusal was that they were both hoping to move up socially, this is the Russians, into colonial society and out of nothingness, a refugee society. For them, if there was one symbol of their former life, it was the job of taking care of women's conveniences. In contrast, the British women, the socially prominent wives of high-ranking British business officials, would never have dreamed of refusing to do this work once it became recognised as a form of community service. While the two women who aspired to grandeur were too proud and too insecure to do it, the British possessors of status were too proud and too secure to refuse. Think about that for a minute. Too proud and too secure. They knew who they were, whether they cleaned the toilets or had tea at an afternoon tea party. It didn't matter what they did. The story is about identity, about being internally secure, and that allows us to take risks, allows us to do something that perhaps seems common or mundane because it doesn't matter, because we're not defined by that action. As a Christian, I seek, that's a work in progress, by the way, to source my identity in Jesus and those who pour good, deep and meaningful wisdom into me. From here I draw life, and it is through this that we can take risks, make mistakes, that deaths can occur and we can fall, but yet we can rise again. Now, Brené Brown is in my circle of elders, as I mentioned earlier, and she really encourages me. New book just out, I haven't read it yet, it's going to be awesome. But her last book was the third part of a series which she wrote on shame and vulnerability. And it was an incredible, she's done 10 years of research on shame, vulnerability, and what enables you to have wholehearted living. Rising strong. If we are brave enough, and often enough, we take risks, we will fall, but then we will get up. And as one of the chapter quotes, spoke to this concept of what our stories mean when we rise strong. This is an awesome image, more about that later. The irony is that we attempt to disown our difficult stories, to appear more whole or more acceptable. But our wholeness and even our wholeheartedness actually depends on the integration of all of our experiences, including the falls. I was actually working on this sermon, and there's a couple of girls next to me were like drawing stuff for a worship service for their church, and they had awesome handwriting, so I got them to draw it out for me. Then we photographed it. So that was awesome. It's so easy to carry around our stories. Now, I went to Thailand, as I told you 2 weeks ago, and I had every intention of coming back with framed pictures. These are 2 pictures that I got over 12 months ago in the UK, and I'm too cheap to frame them in Australia. And so I thought, great, they've travelled from London to Bangkok, from Bangkok to Sydney, they've moved down from Sydney to Melbourne, and I'll take them back to Phuket, and then up to Chiang Mai, and they've come back in the box still. But all of us can do this. We can all just keep our stories rolled up nicely and never let anybody see them and never offer them up to Jesus. This will kind of be a bit of a reveal, but anyway, we'll go with it. See the world. I love this picture. It's a bit of a vintage piece. See the world. It's a young girl who's travelling. I want to get this framed, but I didn't, because I didn't get around to it. How easy is it for us to not get around to sharing our stories? Just to roll them up and put them back away. Well, no one will see them for the next year because I'm too cheap to get it framed. But we have a chance to offer our stories up. We have a chance to have our stories reframed. This one, you all want to know what it is, don't you? It's an ancient map of Paris. I went to Paris for my 40th birthday last year. This year? Last year. Last year, I was 39. All good. Anyway, for the final part of today, what I want to offer you is a chance to be reflective. I've got a musical video piece by Gungor. If you haven't heard of Gungor, they're absolutely ripper. I found them by accident. Like years after they were around, I feel kind of a bit deprived. But this piece by Gungor is about that image of us and our stories and what God can do for us. So what I'm going to encourage you all to do is to sit and just reflect during this piece and visual. And then I'm going to bless you at the end. And for you to just take home perhaps a story that's on your mind that you want to ask encouragement from God, or perhaps a friend or journey with. So thank you guys at the back.
I wonder if I'll ever find my way You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of the dust. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of all around. Hope is springing up from this old ground. Out of chaos, life is being found in you. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of the dust. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of us. Oh, you make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of the dust. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of
Better believe it. I encourage you to take your stories out of the postal tubes and share them. Offer them to those that are safe and ask God to help you see them in a new way. May we be the kind of people that expect miracles, knowing that when our paralysis come and deaths happen, that God is present with us. May we trust his story as our stories unfolds. May we wonder at the mystery of what it is going to be like. May we be brave and take risks, knowing that it isn't always going to work out. We may end up flat on our face. May we believe that our stories are beautiful things and that once we have emerged from the dust, we too will share the whole story in all its gritty splendour for his glory and for the healing of others. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you and give you peace. Amen.